He's the author of the best-selling Everybody Loves a Good Drought. He's a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including, in 2007, the prestigious Raymond Magsaysay Award. 2 documentary films on his work, Nero's Guest and A Tribe of His Own, have received over 20 international awards. More recently, for 24 years until his retirement, he received his BA, MA, MPhil, and PhD degrees from Pune University. His research and teaching interests in the history of anti-caste movements, intellectual and social history of modern Maharashtra, historiography, studies of caste gender consciousness are very well known. His book, Reform Movement of Maharashtra and Caste Class Hegemony, theorizes the dynamics of religious ideologies entrapped in caste class contradictions of the 19th century Maharashtra. His biography of Mahatma Jyotirao Phule situates Phule as the major thinker who tried to build alternative culture in 19th century Maharashtra. His book, Dr. Ambedkar's Historical Methods, unfolds Ambedkar's confrontation of positivist method of thinking. He wrote more than 30 research articles in national and international regional journals. Dr. Bagade is currently working on a trilogy of books tracing 3 different trajectories of caste consciousness in modern Maharashtra, unfolding changing textures of Dalit, peasant, and Brahmin caste consciousness. Thank you, sir, and welcome. I would now like to call the guiding force of today's event, Dr. Mrudul Nere, and our very good colleague who has also been a guiding light for us, Mr. Datta Barasaraf, to felicitate our guests. First to sign out, sir. Yeah. And now, Dr. Sir, please stay in your place. We'll take a group picture. Now, without any further ado, Mr. P. Sainath, please take it away.
Another. Thank you all for coming here. I expected to see an empty hall. And it's been a terrific day for rain, which is good. But I didn't know. In fact, I rang up Dipti and asked her, should we be having this program today, or what do you guys think? Anyway, we're here. Thank you for coming. Getting into this issue of governance by gagging, I think all of us here are justifiably and legitimately shocked at the digging out from the mothballs of a 14-year-old speech and the sanction for prosecution under UAPA for Sheikh Shaukat Ali and Arundhati Roy, and yet, while it's shocking, it shouldn't be surprising. You know? We live in an era where the Delhi High Court has found that we live in a era where the Delhi High Court has found that the words Inqilab Zindabad, Krantikari Salam are the exact incriminating, inflammatory and anti-national. Inqilab Zindabad, Krantikari Salam, these are incriminatory and inflammatory and even perhaps anti-national. This was while denying Umar Khalid bail in the UAPA case against him. The learned judges discussed at length, I'm quoting, certain phraseology. In fact, let me show you the phraseology. Thanks for that, yeah. Certain phraseology in the speech of the appellant, which prima facie appeared to be incriminating per se and inflammatory. The court holds that the Delhi police's charge of terrorism against Umar Khalid are prima facie true. Are prima facie true, making him ineligible for bail. So folks, a speech with Inqilabi Salam is now enough to land you in the choki. For threatening the unity, integrity, and security of the nation. If you make a speech starting with Inqilabi Salam or Krantikari Salam. Actually, that's not just where it ends. It's not just at the thing. I'm looking at case papers and judgments from the Supreme Court which say, lower down, you can read the rest of it if you like. You want to cut out the thing? Yeah, that's fine. You want to go to slideshow mode? Okay, fine. Yeah. Actually, if you look, many of the judgment papers coming out of the Supreme Court are saying so-and-so, in the case of so-and-so versus Union of Bharat. So maybe some smart defense lawyer will pick up on this and use it in the next case, saying that my client's rants were directed at the now defunct entity called India and had nothing to do with our real nation, which is Bharat. Right? So, I mean, that's where it seems to be getting true now. The other interesting thing about the day we are meeting, apart from the downpour, is that it's about 3 days, 72 hours from India's favorite political anniversary. June 25, 1975, declaration of the emergency. And it's a good thing to have to remember that, to memorialize that. Last year I did the Father Stan Swami memorial lecture on that in Ranchi, which lecture just disappeared off the internet a few days later. But what's important for us to remember now is that June 25th, that one day every year, we ritualize our remembrance of the emergency, while every day, every year, we institutionalize our embrace of it. Yeah? Every day, every year, you have something, some judicial order, some law, some bylaw, state law, municipal laws, you know, which institutionalize our embrace of that emergency. Too many of Professor Amartya Sen's argumentative Indians have been largely gagged this past decade. For that matter, Professor Sen himself, consider, has been a target of the gagging process. Yeah? Where he's been threatened that his boundary walls of his house will be torn down by bulldozers, yeah, by the then Vice Chancellor, who has mercifully retired, of the Vishwa Bharati, that Professor Sen, and 19 cents of land would be grabbed by the university, claiming it as its own. So what do we mean by governance by gagging? There's many ways. Governance no longer just means governments. There are other actors involved. And gagging is of many kinds. I'll look at four or five major forms of gagging. There are many more, but these maybe I'm competent to look at. And this morning when I gave this topic to Dipti, and then this morning when I looked at, and I realized that it's huge, and I'm never going to be able to do this in an hour. Each of the 5 forms of gagging can take a lecture by itself. So I begin with this disclaimer. I'm not going to be able to do everything. I begin with this disclaimer that I am, unlike the Vishwaguru, I am biologically born, and of the humble Homo sapiens species, and I have no divine origin or mandate. So there are physical limits to what I can deliver in this hour for you. I'll try my best. I've got tired of people telling me that the job of the journalist is to speak the truth to power. It's a nice cliche. I don't mind it actually in itself, but it seems to be that people, this talk truth to power somehow seems to imply that power is somehow so naive and innocent. You see, they're there waiting to be corrected by us, and we tell them the truth and they will set it right. Power knows a hell of a lot more about what's going on than you and I and all the journalists put together. The idea that, talk the truth to them and you will change the world, that's rubbish. My thing is talk the truth, period, okay? I mean, why only to them? But I think there's a far more important thing. I think you need to go far beyond talking the truth to power. We need to talk the truth. The journalists need to talk the truth about power. We need to coalition A of socio-religious fundamentalists, B of economic market fundamentalists, and C, the bed cohabited by this happy union is what some are pleased to call mainstream media, what I call corporate media, because that's who owns the media, that's who controls the media, that's who has the media in an iron grasp, and what you are allowed to see and know and not know. You got a very good example of that kind of control in the coverage of these elections. Not just the exit polls, but the TV and everything. The only real journalism you got came from individual YouTuber channels in the Hindi belt, and individual alternative journals and magazines and newspapers, but not from the corporate media. Because they cannot. They're part of this alliance. They are part, and they are a very important part of this alliance. Now there is a heavy overlap and overlay between these 3 categories: socio-religious fundamentalists, economic market fundamentalists, and corporate media. Many in power are both religious and market fundamentalists. They're both. Many corporate persons also are both fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists, and economic market fundamentalists. And corporate media, I tried this morning making a count of how many media proprietors there are who do not have their personalized Godman, Sadhu, Sadhvi. It's very difficult. You can count them on the fingers of one hand and have 3 fingers left over. So these are the 3 forces. When we talk about corporate dominance, I'm speaking about a very increasingly narrow layer of corporates. Not the entire corporate sector, but the power that is happening, an ever-expanding power in an ever-narrowing strata. More and more concentration of wealth and power in a diminishing number of hands. Call it a corporate super elite, or if you will, a corporate, as I do, a corporate kleptocracy. Now, what are these 5 forms of gagging that I'm going to try and race through? One is gagging by laws. I'll just list out the 5 and then we'll go one by one. spoiler is that number 4 is the main thing. But anyway, gagging by laws, which governments have been doing for a very long. I also have to say that most of these laws and things that I'm speaking about, most of the problems that I'm speaking about, none of them started in 2014. And we should absorb this fact and be honest about it, because otherwise we're just shaping something to suit a political narrative. But something does happen in 2014. Okay? Gagging by laws, which governments do, all that governments require to be able to gag you through laws is the selective silence or indifference of the judiciary. Unfortunately, they're not just getting selective silence or indifference, they're getting active endorsement from the judiciary. That is one huge problem in the gagging that takes place through laws. Second, by gagging by extra-legal or plainly illegal means, by violence of non-state actors with the connivance often of the state, like you saw in Manipur. Or you see the silence in terms of mob lynchings. Whatever happened to all those who were there who lynched Aflaq Khan? Nothing. Nothing happened to them. What's happened to those in Hathras? The lynchings continue and are scary in their regularity. Mob lynchings. The third, but I also believe that this silence or this connivance, it's only possible by the medias. And whenever I say media today, I mean corporate media, dominant media. It's possible by the corporate media's connivance and collusion, which bring us to gagging number 3. Corporate media and big money, which among many other things, corporates, by the way, gag their own journalists. The media gags its own journalists. Through retrenchment, transfers. I was on a subcommittee of the Press Council of India looking at the retrenchments and layoffs during the pandemic. When we wrote letters to the, we'll get there soon. But building a corporate universe where none of you even knows about the layoffs. How many of you know that 3,500 journalists lost their jobs in the first 16 months of the pandemic after being marked as an essential service? You're not supposed, the whole point of essential service is that your job is bloody protected. Okay? And 3,000 to 3,500 at the May 22 affidavit of the Delhi Union of Journalists, which tells the court, Supreme Court, this is a very partial number. We don't have all the data because the day of the journalist unions is gone. We're not even able to put together all the data that we require to know how many. And apart, that's only 3,000, 3,500 journalists. Apart from that, 10 to 15,000 non-journalist media workers. Yeah? That's another thing. And you can see how all this reflects. The people, you curb the journalists through retrenchments, transfers, pay cuts, and more, building a censorship universe that few outside of media are aware of, and that few inside the media will dare speak of. 4, big money and inequality. Big money and inequality. Inequality in India, if you've seen what Thomas Piketty, the Inequality Labs, etc., several others have said, is today at levels rivaling and even exceeding the inequalities that you saw in the heyday of British imperialism and the British Raj in the 1920s. Okay? It's an astonishing feat for a country whose freedom struggle was based on fighting inequality, whose entire raison d'etre, whose entire soul was around fighting inequality. That was your freedom struggle. And just one little thing, and we come to each of these. Forbes tells me, my favorite website, Forbes, it's our growing numbers of billionaires. I think it's the website I most regularly look at. It's a very aspirational thing. Maybe one day. So Forbes tells me that we now have $200 billionaires in a country which had zero in 1991 when we started our new economic path, and even as late as 1995, we had $0 billionaires. We have 200 now. These 200, their collective net worth is $974 billion. That is 200 individuals, by the way, on your population of 1.41 billion is 0.0000014% of your population. And this, negligible percentage figure, these 200 hold wealth equivalent to 25% of your gross domestic product, reminding you of that whole other meaning of gross. And it's not surprising then that the media covered the farm laws and the farmers' struggle the way they did, entirely on the side of the corporate world and the government. It's not surprising that, anyway, nothing is surprising anymore. It just continues to get more shocking. All these above four gaggings, these factors lead to the number 5, also a very important one. Thank heavens for the Indian ordinary people who struck a blow against it this June 4, which is self-censorship. Okay? Now this self-censorship happens, we all keep quiet about a lot of things, much more than we should ever. Sometimes it happens in self-interest and for personal gain. More often it happens from fear and intimidation. And very likely from apprehension of the risk of losing your job or being thrown in jail. These are the major things that drive it, but we'll get into a little more about this later. Of these different forms of gagging, the entire plethora, on the one hand, old laws are being brought out of the archives and being used with a vengeance, like Epidemic and Diseases Act and old Telegraph Act, which has now become the Telecommunications Act of 2023. But then there are old laws which are being used in the form they were. There are old laws being used anew with amendments. Like UAPA is a 1967 law, but the 2019 amendment makes it deadly. Okay. Then there are new laws, and new laws which are amended within 2 years or 3 years of being made to make them more stringent and nastier. And it leads to a plethora of contradictions, confusions. Now, if the Delhi High Court says, Inqilab Zindabad and Krantikari Salam and all these are inflammatory, incendiary, whatever they say, how do we explain the fact that the Government of India's website, that the Government of India's website on Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, why am I not? Okay. Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav begins by glorifying Inqilab Zindabad. In the page it has on Hasrat Mohani, who coined the phrase or made it popular first. It was a Muslim who did that. He happened to, though, be a member of the Communist Party. Inqilab Zindabad, the slogan which tore through the heart of the British Empire, was coined by the Maulana much who loved his Krishna, etc. I guess that's why they put him up here. But he did first make Inqilab Zindabad a very famous phrase. Thanks. Now, what is the Delhi High Court going to do about these people? This is a Government of India website, glorifying Inqilab Zindabad. By the way, that's Hasrat Mohani, who even exists on a postage stamp in your country, and famous for that one phrase, Inqilab Zindabad. Yeah. So if we look at the inequality, as I said, so number 4, and 5, as I said, was the gagging by self-censorship. But now let's look at the inequality stuff. Here we are with cumulative wealth of India's $200 billionaires, as I said, is 974 billion USD. The Indian budget expenditure, total expenditure last year was 45 lakh or 562 billion, which means that their wealth is 1.7 times greater than your total budget expenditure. For the purists and others, as my friend Ramakumar warned me, I better put in a little line showing them that what the purchasing power parity adjusted dollars are, so that you can have fun with your own calculations. I've simply no time for it. But I've given you the numbers. The cumulative wealth of these guys is 62 times the size of India's agriculture budget, which is 1.25 lakh crores or $15.62 billion. Your PPP figure is there. India's estimated budget, I've given you that number. Mr. Ambani, who graces the totem pole of India's billionaires at the top, his net worth is 118 billion US dollars as of last seen, 7.5 times the expenditure of agriculture as stated in budget, but would have been the biggest or second biggest beneficiary of the 3 farm laws. Okay, so that is his claim to fame right now, apart from the pre-wedding of his son, which has spent a couple of $200 million almost, and got themselves turned down at a Geneva restaurant for the noise they made on the Lake Geneva. And how many of your newspapers and television channels have covered that? Yeah. The owner of that refused to serve them lobster sandwiches. He said there's no way to behave, the way they asked and the way they came to him, etc. Now, the thing about the promise of capitalism, though, is that if you and I work hard, we can also be Ambani, we can also be Adani. Now, I have a problem with that. Let me put it this way. If working hard made you a billionaire, I think every woman in rural India should be a billionaire. Yeah? And every woman in rural Asia, Africa, and Latin America as well. If hard work made you a billionaire. But I decided, let me be open-minded about it. Let me be open-minded about it and look at, can a common man, more likely a common woman, make as much money as Ambani's $118 billion? To my pleasant surprise, I found it's possible. It just takes a little time. Something like it takes 340.6 million years for a household surviving on NREGA. The average wage on NREGA is 289 rupees, and on 100 days that's 28,900, because that's 100 days of work you get. 28,900 rupees, and to pile up the 118 billion, it takes 340.6 million years. Now, if that rural family were to be a little more modest in their aspirations and say, look, all we want to do is to earn what totally collect what Mr. Ambani earns in one year, that would bring it down to a mere 5,190 years. Okay. Mr. Ambani, by the way, in 2019, modestly capped his salary at 15 crores annually and said it should not be more than that. Yeah. Other Indian riches we are reading about in foreign papers, though it burst its way into the Times of India, is the Hindujas, who have now been sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for exploiting labor and for their exploiting their servants, brought of course from India. It's astonishing that Times of India covered it, but it tells me that probably that I haven't seen much Hinduja company advertising in the Times of India recently. So this tells me that we might see some advertising by the Hindujas in the Times of India in coming days. Now, in gagging by laws, there's this, as I said, it only requires the silence and indifference of the judiciary. The big phenomenon in gagging by laws, a third of this country knew it long before the fire reached the urban middle classes in 2014-15. In the countryside, the single biggest element of this gagging by laws is the criminalization of dissent. Okay? The criminalization of dissent. In fact, when you look at who is at the receiving end, you realize it's also a criminalization of poverty, of being poor. That's what it's about. Long before 2014, if this was happening in the country, on quite a large scale in the countryside. By the way, Dalits and Adivasis are old hands at criminalization of dissent. Sorry, they're very old hands at criminalization of dissent. They know what it is. They have experienced it grotesquely, especially in the grabbing of the little land they have. It's after 2014, the fires reach the middle classes and the elite, the urban middle classes and the elite. Now, just give me, post 2014, what happens? Post 1991, I'm sorry, I said long before 2014. Post 1991, the land grabs go up in scale and in laws in terms of forcibly acquiring land for SCZs, for various other projects of the elite and the corporate world and the ruling classes. Just give you a few examples. How you paralyze people and ordinary people. Take the POSCO agitation. The agitation against POSCO, where the people of Jagat Singhpur actually threw out POSCO to find themselves saddled with Jindal. But when they threw out POSCO, the process that happened saw hundreds and hundreds of cases being filed. At one stage, when I used to visit Jagat Singhpur, no 14-year-old kid could venture out of his village because there would be some case against him somewhere in some police station which he'd be picked up. Many families could not go for the wedding of their relations in another village because all of them had cases pending on their heads. Abhay Sahu, the leader of that agitation, I checked with him this morning. You know, it's sad that one speaks to an old friend only to say, okay, how many cases today? And he clarified that 78 cases had been filed against him, 72, of which 58 are still pending. Yeah, they've not been withdrawn, they've not been dropped. If you went to Jagat Singhpur, all those people fighting for their rights, they were either Dalits or Adivasis. You know, the ones who were being jailed, okay. Then if you went to Srikakulam, as I did many years ago, a 78-year-old lady, this much, she couldn't be more than 35, 40 kilograms. I doubt if she was more than 35. Could hardly lift a sickle anymore. She was an agricultural laborer. Multiple cases including attempt to murder of police party. Armed police party, she is 78 years old. Yeah? And attempt to murder. Then in Kalinganagar, there was this Adivasi couple, Ravi Jarika and I think Uma Jarika. Very educated, degrees, BSc degrees from Utkal University. Very unfamiliar with police stations and things. But once they stood up to the Tata Steel plant and the firing happened, nobody there has less than 40 cases on their continuing from 2005 onwards. Then there is Koraput, where I went and met, all pre-2014, where I went and met and tried to meet, because we could only meet as lawyer finally, a young assistant professor of chemistry in a college in the Koraput jail. I went to meet him because the list of charges were fascinating. They included theft of a buffalo. So I went to Odisha's top cop, now retired, and asked him, what is this kind of crazy thing? In Ravi Jarika, you have some absurd bootlegging stuff, which is absolutely untrue. Here you have theft of a buffalo. He said he was very forthcoming, maybe because he was a few days away from retirement. He was very forthcoming. He said, sir, you don't understand. When we take these cases to the court, the serious charges, the judges dismiss them. So, and I'm quoting him verbatim, he said, we need a judicious mix of charges. To keep that fellow under control and discipline, he has to report to the police station or at the court. That's all they do all their lives. Every week, 4 days, they're reporting at one police station or at a court or somewhere else. Yeah, a judicious mix of charges, including theft of a buffalo. And that young assistant professor probably would be able to tell the difference between buffalo and another bovine species with some difficulty, but otherwise has nothing to do with it. The cake prize goes to Kudankulam, where the people fighting were mainly fishing communities, fisher folk. I checked this morning with them about what happened. Kudankulam is a fantastic case where the use of sedition, waging war against the state, it's unrivaled in any other part of the country. In 1857, what we now call First War of our Independence, though it wasn't, there were many earlier struggles for freedom. But between 1857 and 1947, the total number of people the British Raj prosecuted for sedition in Tamil Nadu was 2,000. In 2 years, 2011 to 2013, the number of people prosecuted for sedition in Kudankulam was 9,000. And the number of people charged with waging war on the state, 13,000. 13,000. 9,000 sedition. Okay? The entire British Raj period, 1857 to 1947, those 90 years, 2,000. From when the law on sedition began to be used in Tamil Nadu, I suspect. But something does happen in 2014. One, new laws, but more importantly, the scale, scope, and interpretative insanity of all the laws we have and some which we made post 2014, that explodes with 2014. And you're today sitting in a state where, in a nation where the Delhi High Court says Inqilab Zindabad is inflammatory and incriminatory. Yeah? So that's what happens. That scale on which it explodes from 2014, that's simply fantastic. Actually, when I went, when the JNU trouble broke out, Kanaya's arrest, I went there, I did a teach-in. My first comment to my descendants, if you like, because I'm a JNUite, 77-80, the first thing I told the JNU students was, welcome to the rest of the country. Because and I told them about Kudankulam, I told them about Odisha, about Koraput and all of that. Now, many laws many of the old laws had ridiculous clauses perched within their frame from colonial times. Suddenly these are applied with great energy. Those clauses were there before. Okay? But incredibly new energy in pushing them, they may not have been implemented in the last 75 years. And also brought in new laws or new clauses that bring in a deadly new context. For sedition, for instance, and now, how many days away? Are we 3 days away from the new criminal codes? Oh boy, just look at, when the Law Commission is asked to look at this law of sedition and throw it out, they suggest more stringency to the law. This is what your Law Commission did. They suggested there should be greater stringency to the sedition law. Now, I'm going to run through some of these because I need to look at 3 more. We have done inequality and we're doing this laws thing. The Telegraph Act of sedition we have done. The Telegraph Act now replaced with the Telecommunications Act of 2023. The Epidemic and Diseases Act 1897. Do you know that during the COVID, journalists were arrested and charged under the Epidemic and Diseases Act 1897. Samuel Raja Pandian, the guy who runs a portal in Coimbatore with a very beautiful name. It's a city magazine. It's called Simplicity. Simplicity. He was arrested for doing a story on the Coimbatore General Hospital doctors and nurses working without protective equipment. Okay? And then, obviously that story came from the doctors and nurses. But he was put under this. They were trying to book him under sedition. And so you have that. Here's the thing. Do you know who the last journalist was prosecuted under Epidemic and Diseases Act? He was from Maharashtra. His name was Bal Gangadhar Tilak. He was prosecuted under the Epidemics and Diseases Act for writing and attacking the authorities on what was happening in the famine. Okay? So that's where the act was last used against a journalist. So there are also laws that were brought in good faith which are implemented in bad faith. There are laws brought in bad faith which are implemented in worse faith. There are across the states, if you look at the laws at state level, the special project vehicles that allow states to do, those states that have this special purpose vehicles, to grab any land they want from anyone, and which also give new powers brought by the states, like for instance Andhra and Telangana, a district collector can dismiss an elected sarpanch. A district collector can dismiss an elected sarpanch. I'm saying the verdict people gave you on June 14 reflects that they know what's going on, that they know what's happening to democracy. And in those places you saw it. Then there is the Prevention of Damage to Property, Public Property Act. In almost all the Delhi riots cases, this has been brought in. And the wonderful thing is that these people who are supposed to be destroying public property, this was happening at the same time when the government of India and security forces were digging giant trenches in the national highway to stop the farmers at the gates of Delhi. Nobody has brought any charges of destruction of public property against them for destroying the national highway that brings people to Delhi. Yeah. It's been used by them, and it doesn't at all refer to the demolition of hundreds of houses in different towns of UP, including Ayodhya. It doesn't look at what this demolition of a horrible term, and I appeal to you not to use it. People keep talking about bulldozer justice. It is bulldozer terror, and that's what it should be called. Don't call it bulldozer. Don't dignify it by linking it with a word like justice, which is to my mind the most important of all words. The Supreme Court has upheld PMLA, the amended PMLA, and the amended PMLA, one of the biggest targets is us, journalists, are being targeted under this. If you prosecute a journalist under something, you should not allow him the chance to speak of freedom of expression. If you say he's money laundering, then people will think, hey, we shouldn't be speaking up in favor of this guy. So this has been happening very frequently to journalists. There are the FERA, the FEMA, there's Harsh Mandar prosecuted under FERA. It's been used against activists a hell of a lot. Supremely important is the IT Act of 2000. But just before I get to that, look at how the states have been using ESMA to criminalize strikes. You're criminalizing strikes. The right to strike is a fundamental right of the worker. And anyway, there is also CRPC 144, which allows the government, it allows the state to do anything the damn state wants. So you have that. But as I said, the IT Act of 2000, takedown notices, arrests of journalists, arrests of activists, arrests of anyone you don't like, and the perpetual endless amendments to these laws. Very often, here is the trick, the laws themselves are very limited in scope, but the rules devised for the laws are unlimited and unending, and you keep adding new rules to the rules under the law. The Telecom Act of 2023, it's under these that the government, and previously Telegraph Act, it's under these that the Vishwaguru made us number one in one more field. Largest number of internet shutdowns and takedowns in the world. No other nation comes close. Between 2012 and 2024, India saw more than 805 internet shutdowns, 2/3 of them in Kashmir alone, more than 2/3 of them, in just Kashmir. Imagine what it is to live in that situation, work in that situation. Then there are the state level acts, the municipality rules, laws on conversions, state level law, cow slaughter laws, which the Karnataka Cow Slaughter Act takes an old phrase from old laws of the and gives it a totally new twist. So you can be a vigilante, go about destroying whatever you do, and the law says those acting in good faith under this law may be deemed to be public servants. So we go raid Aflaq's house, kill his family, lynch Aflaq, and I can be deemed a public servant. This is the Karnataka law. It first brought as an ordinance, and they haven't changed it in the final law. And then, in all this, the role of the judiciary, they've upheld the Criminal Defamation Act. They've upheld criminal defamation. They've upheld the PMLA, money laundering amendments. They waffled a lot on sedition before it became irrelevant, since it's all gone into your new codes and everything that will come. They took forever to say that electoral bonds are not constitutional, but they haven't directed a return of the money. They haven't directed any return of the money. So that money, 85% of which was just with the Bharatiya Janata Party, does not have to be returned to anybody. It's there. They can spend it, including in the forthcoming Maharashtra elections. But the same Supreme Court, it did not find time to rule on constitutionality of the farm laws. The government repealed it before it came to that. It takes years on all these to talk about constitutionality, which is the job of the apex court. Yeah, but it found time to initiate contempt proceedings against Kunal Kamra. Somehow these stand-up comics are very dangerous people. Terrible. You have to know how to deal with them. Then there is number 4, yet another gagging. Gagging by extra-legal or illegal means, where non-state actors are not only tolerated but egged on by it. You've had for 20 years the VHP and various temple-related violence. You've had Bajrang Dal and Love Jihad. You've had cow slaughter lynchings, and I just mentioned Karnataka. So what's happening is that laws like in the Karnataka law, what was meant to protect public servants has been extended to private parties. That is a deadly thing. You're outsourcing violence to vigilantes, the state's power to vigilantes. Now, whether it was Manipur or in other spheres, attacks on Bollywood or attacks on individuals, and attacks and institutional capture, the banning of history books, the bringing of new history books. By the way, full disclosure, my work was also thrown out by the NCERT. But I was in distinguished company. I got kicked out in the same batch as Charles Darwin. Yeah. And which reminds me of our old Mumbai police commissioner, Satyapal Singh, whom I used to know when he was actually police commissioner Pune before police commissioner Mumbai. Satyapal Singh, in the 2019 elections, he made it his mission to destroy Charles Darwin. He said it's the most unscientific thing. He asked all of us in his meeting in Lucknow, has any one of you, I challenge, has any one of you gone into the forest and watched apes turning into men? Where is your scientific proof? I spoke in the same platform the very next day after he spoke, and people raised this question. And I said, look, he's got a point. None of us have ever seen apes turning into men, but we are privileged people. We live in an era where we are watching the reverse process. Yeah, and quite on a large scale. So maybe he has a point, let's not quarrel with him. And worst of all in this extra-legal violence is the murder of 4 leading public intellectuals in the last 10 years. Narendra Dabholkar, Govind Pansare, M.M. Kalburgi and Gauri Lankesh. Now, there are also agitations calling for withdrawal of state books, etc. There are school textbooks, hold on. And then comes the media's role. The media need to know something. Please stop analyzing media in terms of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Arey Babre, as many before me have noted, there is no problem of freedom of speech in India. Here I am. The problem in India is not, here I am talking about Mr. Modi and Vishwaguru and everything to all of you. The problem in India is not freedom of speech. The problem in India is freedom after the speech. Right? That is our real problem. So who knows what happens after this speech? I just hope that Deepthi and Purva and others don't face the consequences of my indiscretions. Once upon a time, the Indian press was the wonder of the world in terms of the sheer diversity and multiplicity of voices. There was a time when anybody with 5 rupees and a vision could start a newspaper, which is how the Hindu started, for instance. Yeah. Now, the media are overwhelmingly corporate owned. You can't think of starting an afternoon paper in Mumbai without an initial outlay of about 100 crores or more. And you should be willing to make losses for 5 years before you can dream of breaking even. Now, do you know what the size of the Indian media entertainment industry is? It is one industry. It's called ME industry. Ernst & Young gave us this figure this March, 2.32 trillion rupees or $28 billion. Now on top of that, in that the biggest owner was Mr. Ambani. Okay? 2 weeks after that report, 2 months after that report, Mr. Ambani struck a deal with Disney Hotstar, which gives one entity more than 50% of the streaming business in India. And that transaction was $8.5 billion. So you're coming to $36.5 billion. Yeah, you're coming to $36.2 billion. That's the size out of which 25% or so, that value belongs to one individual. Where is that diversity? Where was that lovable cacophony of voices in the Indian press that you had? Which, by the way, was so important for you in your freedom struggle. Those multiple voices, many voices. But then those papers were founded and run by Baba Saheb Ambedkar, by Gandhi, by dyed in the wool believers in freedom. Now look at how the media actually covered some of the biggest events of our time. The farm laws. Do you know that in two of those three acts, one clause, either 13 in one and 17 in the other, uses an old colonial thing which Congress never threw it out. It says, no suit or prosecution shall lie against no suit or prosecution shall lie against officers of the central government or officers of the state government. And what's more important, you have no right to legal remedy because it bars the jurisdiction of the civil courts. It bars the jurisdiction of the civil courts and tells you have to only go to a appellate tribunal where such distinguished people as the Naib Tehsildar and Deputy Collector sit. And they are going to fight Ambani. They are going to fight Adani for you. Talk sense. I mean, be real. Yeah, this was what was put in. Can you tell me one major newspaper in this country or one major channel in this country that on its website or its pages gave you the full text of the three farm laws? Go tonight and look. Look now if you like. So we did in the People's Archive of Rural India, which publishes in 15 languages. If you go to our library, you'll find the full text of the laws and you'll see many, many stories linked to those laws on what they meant to farmers. Yeah. Your media never told you that the farm struggle was the largest peaceful, constitutional, democratic struggle for justice in the world, organized at the height of the pandemic. Prior to that, everybody knows about Occupy Wall Street. It was 8,000, 9,000 protesters who were thrown out of Zuccotti Park after 9 weeks. Your farmers lasted 53 weeks. They survived the worst winter of Delhi in 70 years, the worst summer in 40. They suffered torrential rainfall in the monsoon. 720 farmers died for you and me, not just for themselves, because they were fighting for that right to legally challenge. The right to legal remedy is a very important right in any democracy. The right to legal redress, the right to seek legal remedy. Without that, what do your fundamental rights mean? Nothing. Or you look at the journalists and the layoffs. When on the subcommittee looking into the retrenchments, we wrote to the newspapers asking them to tell us how many jobs were lost in this period. And we said, please don't tell us about voluntary retirements also, because I know so many people who volunteered to be sacked. The reply we got from Times of India was, it's none of your business. The Press Council has nothing to do with this. Press Council purview is freedom of expression. This has nothing to do with it. This is meant for the law tribunals. It's meant for the labor tribunals. You have no locus standi. An absolutely rude, outrageously rude reply was what we got from this and a couple of other papers. Then, look, how much your news media are failing you. How many of you can say that we have seen in our media a real figure that the media itself that supports on how many Indians died during the COVID pandemic? How many Indians died during the COVID pandemic? Have you seen anyone challenging the official figure? The Vishwaguru figure is 4,86,000. Less than 500,000. Lancet says 4.2 million. Johns Hopkins gives three lists, all of which are over 4 million. World Development Council says, WHO says 4.7 million. World Development Council DC says 4.9 million. But Vishwaguru says 4.86 lakh, end of discussion. And there are very easy ways of ending discussion. What they did, there was one period in the pandemic, if you will recall, when the media as a whole functioned brilliantly, reported relentlessly, and that was when bodies were piling up on the banks of the Ganga, on the banks of the Sarayu. That's when I felt proud to be a journalist again, when I saw what was happening. 1 month and it completely disappeared. How did it disappear? The government, state government and the central government pulled the plug on government advertising. When they pulled, by the way, you should see the new laws and how this is being implemented in Kashmir now. When they pulled the plug on government advertising, everybody collapsed. One newspaper group had the spunk to continue fighting, and what a price. Dainik Bhaskar continued. 2 weeks after Dainik Bhaskar continuing to plow its lonely furrow, Dainik Bhaskar was visited by ED, IT, Economic Offences Wing. There were so many people there, I think that if any of these guys saw another agency going by on the street, they called them to join the party. There was so many people on the necks and back of Dainik Bhaskar, and obviously Dainik Bhaskar had to pipe down. Yeah, this was a gagging of many kinds that was put in there. So government advertising. Tell me, how many of you have a figure that you trust from your media on how many people fled as migrants from the cities back to the villages in COVID? How many of you have a figure from your media that you remember and that you thought was authentic? You didn't. The numbers were wiped out. The government would not allow it. On March 30th, on March 31st, March 30th, 2020, the Attorney General of India, in an affidavit before the Supreme Court, said there is not a single migrant on the highways now, as of 11:30 a.m. this morning. A month, then 14 days later, the same Attorney General, before the same innocent, naive bench of the Supreme Court, says 23,000 plus relief centers and food feeding centers have been opened for migrants. Now, what are you opening those relief camps for if there isn't a single migrant on the road? Maybe for promoting tourism in COVID. Yeah. Then, but one of the great things about large government is that what one department suppresses comes out from another department. In May 26th, the Indian Railways put out a press release. Just the railways and the buses connected to it, that they had transported in 25 days 91 lakh migrants. That's the number of, yeah, you're right. That's the number of tickets sold. Now, those of us who are not activists and who don't understand this, what Ram Kumar is saying, Indians, rural Indians especially, have a very healthy attitude towards public transport. Yeah? Public transport is for the public. Why the hell should I be paying for it? Yeah. So, when your farmers go from Nashik to Delhi in railways, the common understanding, even of the TT and the ticket collector is 200 people, 25 tickets is good. You pass them around and everybody has a ticket. I mean, this is how India functions. Okay, this is your country. Know it, love it. It's how it is. I mean, can you imagine 3,000 farmers going from Nashik to this thing, buying 3,000 tickets? They're as it is bankrupt and killing themselves for lack of money. Why do they have to spend that much on railway tickets? So, if the railways say 91 lakh tickets sold, imagine how many people traveled. Okay. So, look, today the media is so bankrupt that you are finally getting, as I said, the Hindi journalism, cutting edge of Hindi journalism as I see it, is happening on YouTube channels. Many young guys who, when I'm traveling up north, come and talk to me and say, they find me in some other place like Jharkhand and they come and say, he also came for a conference which I came for. I got interviewed by 3 guys in 2 days who go back and put it on their little channels. These guys were saying from day one, the BJP will not cross 40 seats in Uttar Pradesh. They said it. Go and see. How many of them said it? Yeah. but that diversity is now going to be crushed out. As incidentally, the Facebook, Google, Twitter have all acknowledged that the largest number of government requests for takedown, blocking and withdrawals has been from India, and that they have succumbed to it. The Facebook whistleblower in Congress, testimony to Congress, said we did anything that they asked. Okay? So this is where you are as a society. And remember, who is the biggest media owner? Mr. Ambani is the biggest media owner. He is the richest Indian. He is the biggest beneficiary of the farm laws if they come through. And Mr. Ambani doesn't know how many, he can't name all the channels he owns. I could help him there, but I don't think he'd be interested in learning anything from me. And lastly, and I wind up with this thing, is the fifth gagging. All these forms of intimidation, gagging, force, all of these lead finally to that fifth gagging, which is self-censorship, which, as I said, happens sometimes from expectation of self-interest and personal gain, more often from fear and intimidation, very likely from risk of losing a job or landing in jail. So there's state censorship, there is corporate censorship, as I said, Google. Do you know that when Disha Ravi was arrested, Delhi police put out a thank you to Google and Twitter on the toolkit stuff. They put out a thank you for cooperation. Mob censorship, as we have seen. Slap censorship. For those of you who don't know what slap censorship is, SLAPP, strategic lawsuit aimed at curbing public participation. My poor friend Paranjoy Guha Thakurta will tell you he could speak a whole day to you on slap, because Adani has slapped him with lawsuits running to over about 100 crores or some thereabouts, but tens of crores in any case. It chills anywhere in the world. This is an American invention, of course, the slap strategy. It chills free speech. You think if I write this, I'm going to get a suit for be slapped with 100 crore notice. Who knows, might still happen with this talk. All this leads to self-censorship. We gag ourselves. So, winding with this, what do we do? There's plenty to do. And this first thing is to recognize that what you and I haven't been doing, the ordinary people of this country have been doing. The ordinary people of this country showed us something about standing up and rejecting the whittling away of democracy. You saw that in your elections. The farmers of your country, the largest struggle for protest for justice in the world, 100,000 people gathering at the gates of Delhi. Yeah. If there's one thing, I've already discussed the farmers, but I will say this. If there is one thing they taught us the meaning of the word resistance. And it was a peaceful, constitutional, legitimate protest. Right? All around us, the public are giving us that inspiration. All around us. Well, in 2019, for me it was one of the great moments of my life when tens of thousands of college students in their teens across the country were standing at the gates and reading the preamble to the Constitution. I loved it that all those who were ever my students were there. Though I did tell them, बढ़िया है, preamble तो बहुत बढ़िया है, लेकिन you might find a few other interesting parts in the Constitution as well. Please read directive principles of state policy. And I think that this is something that's going to become, please remember that beating up on the Constitution became a very big issue in this election. It was a huge issue in this election, right? So remember this, that I think fighting for enforceability of directive principles, 4 or 5, right to work, right to education, not the truncated RTE which you have, but a genuine one. The right to food, subsumed in the right to life, the right to health, the right to shelter. If these few we can I'm not suggesting something that the courts are dismissing. I need you to hear this, that the courts, the Supreme Court has given three judgments of the Supreme Court, the last being by Justice Ashok Ganguly. 3 times in the last 40 years, the Indian Supreme Court has ruled that the directive principles of state policy are every inch as important as the fundamental rights. The Supreme Court has said so. Why should we be keeping quiet on it and not demanding their enforcement? Yeah? It won't be easy. And I think that ultimately it comes down to what, by the way, Dalits and Adivasis, as I mentioned in the very first gagging, have been doing long before us, fighting for that one word, justice. It's never been easy. It has been done. It won't be easy. It will be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that lovely address. You had the entire audience captive, and I've never seen anyone this engaged in any of our sessions before. Thank you so much for that. And now, Dr. Bagde. Dr. Bagade, sir, please, sorry. Just going to turn. No, sir, I've done it. It'll go. Just a second. Dr. Bagadi, yes.
After such a brilliant and fascinating speech, to offer some kind of comment is quite a precarious task. He made mention of talking about power. And he interestingly took up this genealogy to colonial period. You might be knowing about Foucault. Foucault talked about 3 kind of powers and the linkages between power and knowledge. He spoke about governmentality, governance. And this governance is related to rationality and governance. So this is a tricks, this is a technique, this is conduct, this is activity to shape the minds of people, that how they could conduct themselves. So this governmentality is certain kind of attempt to shape the conduct of people. And interestingly, Phule makes mention of governmentality. His important text, British government under the cloak of Brahmanism, is an interesting piece to understand the structures of governmentality. Interestingly, he speaks about the kind of struggle which was going in the Konkan, that is Khoti agitation. At that time, the British officers in favor of peasantry started taking some kind of steps. At that time, Phule makes observation that the Brahmin code, by deploying matlabi religion, that is selfish religion, has turned their minds against their own interest. And the peasantry, has appealed to Britishers that let us be under the power of courts. So there is a certain kind of strategy of matlabi religion, that is the selfish religion. Matlabi is, the translation is not good. Matlabi is very interesting kind of term Phule can say uses. Phule uses an interesting kind of structure to understand this Matlabi religion in the whole kind of politics of governance. He makes a mention of devious logic. The power mobilized through devious logic. And it's very interesting. Now, particularly after 2014, you know about different patterns of devious logics. And therefore, one has to understand this devious logic has a certain kind of structure within which the people the conduct of people are governed. I won't take examples of it, but I will somehow take example of Mahatma Phule's drama. Mahatma Phule has written a drama, Tritiya Ratna, Third Eye, where there is a protagonist, peasant women. And peasant women was denying alms to Brahmins that you are a good-looking, you can say male, you can labor and you can earn your own livelihood. Why you are coming to us for alms, for dakshina? And then this man, this Brahmin, takes up a certain kind of ploy of Jyotish, astrology, and then he asked her that she was pregnant, so she's, the kind of point is that he can say, says that your coming child would be, his birth would be detrimental to your husband. And then whole the logic change, and she gradually submits to the kind of power of Brahmin. Interestingly, this is the submission which is carried through certain kind of schemes of devious logic. For example, he has already mentioned about this, the whole kind of term that anti-national stigmatization. The whole stigma which is being operated, the exclusion and certain kind of processes which are associated with it, happens through this devious logic. And you will find that this devious logic has several kinds of features. For example, Phule points out about this solar prashasan, that is the very kind of, we can say it was different and now power in India is now different. So there is a certain kind of change, but the structures of governance are still operating. The important facet which is most important to me is that Ambedkar has understood about this whole kind of ways the conduct of people is governed. And the conduct of people is governed by a certain kind of schemes of ideas, devious logic. And you will find that, for example, the Chaturvarna. In Chaturvarna, you will find that Brahmin, Kshatriya and Vaishya are seen as patrons, as seen as guardians. And the Shudra is a ward. The relationship is interesting. The relationship we could understand in terms of family and we could somehow legitimize it. But the war doesn't have any authority on itself. Self-determinism and freedom is denied to war. And interestingly, you have to understand these structures of unfreedoms are integral to conducting the governance in India. And therefore, one has to understand the important kind of phenomenon which is observed by Dr. Ambedkar, what he is talking about, lawlessness of law. The term lawlessness of law is very important to understand. And you will find that now it is unleashed. Everywhere you will find that the way the mobs are taking certain kind of roles to change the whole kind of reality into a fascist state is through this kind of, we can say, lawlessness. And you will find lawlessness has several kinds of shades to understand. For example, when Ambedkar was talking about lawlessness, he was talking about British governance. As being the rulers, they have started becoming as lawless. So he talks about the Hastings and his kind of way of taking the wife of other man and things like that. He was talking about the kind of way they're behaving as lawlessness. Then he talks about this lawlessness in Indian kind of situation is lawless as dharma and adharma. And you will find that this whole idea of dharma is central to the idea of lawlessness of law. And Ambedkar identifies that Manusmriti is the grounding force of lawlessness of law, and therefore you will find that this particular kind of scheme of love jihad is quite popular. It's basically because in Indian kind of structure of thinking, the control of women is essential for a family, for society, and therefore you will find that the structures governing on us are mobilized to govern us. So that is the point which one has to understand. Interestingly, we will find that therefore the mass lynchings are taking place. This whole kind of lawlessness, where my act is legitimate, my act is dharma, my exit rights, my act is ethical, is being structured through certain kind of logic that Fulle talks as devious logic. So interestingly, one has to understand this whole kind of way this logic is being structured. And there is a grand kind of scheme. He was talking about corporate media, and you will find these structures of logic has to be in certain sense blasted. He was rightly saying that this whole kind of, you can say, structure of third farm laws, when middle class was succumbed to the logic of media, but so-called ignorant peasant was, we can say, knowing about the whole kind of, you can say, impact of these laws, and therefore one has to understand that there is a certain kind of empirical kind of circumstances within which we can somehow fight out these devious logics. So there is a fight against this devious logic. These logics are around us, and particularly they are mobilized through matlabi logics, matlabi religion, and therefore I urge you to take his kind of speech seriously, not only in certain sense of reality, but he is known for transformative politics. His kind of speeches, his kinds of writing is always for transformative politics. A teacher like me always emulate him for his transformative, his concern and dedication for transformative politics. So I take this particular kind of idea of fighting with this divisive logic, divisive and devious logic. And secondly, we have to take up the fight against the lawlessness of law. This is against untouchables, it is against the heretics, it is against those who are speaking truth. So this lawlessness of law, which is now become a certain kind of reality of India, which Ambedkar fought at that time, and he always made mention of lawlessness of law. And therefore, we have to see this kind of point to fight against this lawless law. I thank the Yashwantrao Chavhan Center for giving me opportunity to chair this kind of important speech. I thank you for all. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open for questions and answers now. We're going to have 2 mics that will be passed around. And I'd request you all to please raise your hands and keep your questions short. Thank you. Questions over there.
Thank you, Professor Sanath. That was very stimulating and very truthful. My question is international media highlighting what's going on in India, or it's also like the corporate media in India?
Before I answer that question, Professor Bagade's points made me realize that I forgot to tell you a new fact on inequality that I got to know of yesterday from the same Piketty and Lab and Co. 90% of Indian billionaires' wealth is held by the upper caste. 90% of Indian billionaire wealth is held by upper caste. Yeah. So on the international media, we are actually following a model that wasn't devised by us. Our own model and our own media, where our media, our press, was the child of the freedom struggle. It stood for something. It had particular values. Yeah? It had different streams, from the imperialist stream represented but the Times of India and them, to the Gandhis, to the Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who launched 3 journals, from that whole spectrum. They spoke in different voices, but they spoke honestly, because their aim was, they did not see journalism, they saw journalism as a tool of change, as a tool of social reform, as a tool of struggle. Whereas when you are corporate owned, you are going to see it as a tool of profit. I mean, it's foolish to expect otherwise. The concentration of media in the United States started happening rapidly in the late 60s. The US media is incredibly monopolized. And many of us start romanticizing internet and social media. Please know this. The largest and nastiest monopolies in history are the digital monopolies. Why? The digital monopolies have one thing that no other monopoly had ever. They owned your personal data. They own and I call them human data traffickers. They own and control, they sell and buy your personal data. If, Mudit, you were to tomorrow send an email to Sudarshan here that you are going on a holiday to Sao Paulo, Brazil, from that day, your mail is going to be spammed with holiday resorts in Sao Paulo, other places to see in Brazil. If you buy a product on Amazon, how many suggestions do you get? We've been algorithmed out of our intellect. So it's in the nature of the beast that it will always, and incidentally, 4 companies. It was at least 7 big majors. Then someone buys Facebook, someone buys Instagram, and the concentration gets worse and worse and worse. Now, when you are trying to run an instrument that is essential to public knowledge and information, there is a contradiction if your making money depends on your suppressing that information. That's why Google, Facebook, Twitter acceded to every Indian government demand. India is Facebook's largest market. Its largest revenue market is India. So if the Indian government tells them, block Professor Bagade's account, they're going to do it. What does he have to challenge them with? There is no equivalence there at all. So the corporate media is worldwide a huge thing. And elsewhere too, it has ties with the kind of forces in their country that I mentioned here.
Okay. Over there.
I have a question in the context of the beautiful statement that Professor Bagade said, lawlessness of law. So, very often there is a statement that the parliament is the will of the people. How come the will of the people is used to force through negative kind of laws? And in the context of the much above statement that judiciary is independent and legislature is independent, I think that's one of the biggest myths. So with all this happening around, the common man is not safe at all. So what is the possible route to get out of this?
See, 2 things. One, when you spoke about Parliament, for instance, and I think this lawlessness of law, it's a deeply profound and brilliant. It explains a lot of things in 3 words. But I want you to know this idea about democracy and about Parliament. How much it fits into the framework of the inequalities both of us were speaking about. In 2004, your Parliament is a terrific representative of these inequalities. In 2004, we introduced the electoral affidavit, where you state what your personal wealth is. Somehow people become very modest when they have to do that. But still, 2004, if you look at the ADR data of Association for Democratic Reforms, which really puts out before and after elections data. 2004, there were 32% of India's Lok Sabha MPs. 32% were crorpatis. In 2009, that was 52%. In 2014, that was 83%. In 2019, it was 88%. In the 18th Lok Sabha, it is 93%. So 93% of a parliament of crorpatis is going to debate and discuss on behalf of some of the poorest people on the planet. And by the way, this time the need for crorpatis became even more because that lawlessness of law, where a government smashed the opposition. Look, the victory of the ruling party has very much to do with destroying the funding ecosystem of the opposition forces. ED, IT, all these were part of the campaign. They were part of the election campaign. Now, when this happens, parties like the Congress and others had to put up not their best candidates, but their richest candidates. They had to put up candidates who could afford their own campaign. All the other parties had to do this. So they put up candidates who could. I got reports from all over the country where strongholds of parties like the Congress in Chhattisgarh, Bastar, there was not a single banner or poster because they couldn't afford it. The local campaigners had no money. Yeah, so I'm saying there is also that to be looked at, that the inequality quotient extends right into your parliamentary democracy, where 93% of the Lok Sabha are crorpatis. How do we find a way out of it? I told you, ordinary people are showing us a way out of it. Do you know that one of the great things about Mumbai, in 1972, Nawal Tata stood for election. I've gone back and looked at the newspapers of that time. The discussion was, will his margin be the all-time record margin? He stood from South Mumbai, richest constituency in India. Will his margin be the biggest margin in Indian history? All sorts of things. The candidate against him was an unknown trade unionist before the campaign and unknown after he finished his term. He defeated Nawal Tata by 1.5 lakhs votes. That could still happen in Indian democracy at the time. Now it's much more difficult with social media, television, the advertising power that you have, so determined by the resources, financial resources you have. We need to fight monopoly.
Yes. Vinaya, at the back.
Can I?
Oh, okay, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. P. Srinath is known for his openness, his boldness for years. I mean, we have been hearing, writing about. It is P. Sainath.
Thank you.
My name is Sudhakar Malpe. I represent a non-government organization which is founded by Dr. Usha Mehta Gandhian. First thing is, sir, you have not explained to us, this August audience, about the Kudam issue. Because, what exactly? Was that a national issue or is it only fisherman's issue? That's number one. Number two is about, you talked about, billionaires and 10 rich Indians.
10?
Rich Indians.
Okay.
So, are they really rich or they are borrowed money from the bank? They are the rich. Because this need to be explained to.
Okay, I get
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
The second question is easier to approach straight away. The second of these questions
At the back, please.
is easier to address straight away. If you look at the list of Indian billionaires, and that is why that ties with establishment and government are so close. Most Indian billionaires are what my economist friends call rent-thick billionaires. They make their money from exploitation of public resources handed over to them by the government and the state. So if I am making my billions from, and Professor Bagade is Prime Minister of a government that is giving me contracts over all highways, all the ports in the country will be given to me, all airports will be given to me. What are the chances of my newspaper ever saying a word against Professor Bagade? What are the chances of that? So it is essentially public money handed out as largesse that has given them that. You can look at the sale of BSNL onwards. A company, that time the BSNL was sold for what, for 180 crores or 1,800 crores. The company had 3,600 crores in the banks, and it sold for 1,800 crores. Okay, so this was the giveaway, the total selling of the family silver to selected friends. And by the way, this is what, the question you are asking me is really linked to a question I everywhere get about crony capitalism, where this word mystifies me. Is there any other kind of capitalism? What are the other kinds? Please tell me.
poorest candidates for whom people campaigned, and we saw them and we saw the kind of results as well. So that was an interesting observation in Maharashtra, where the parties didn't really succumb to finding the richest candidates, but probably finding the, I don't know if the best suited, but the poorest for sure. And how they came and won the elections, maybe from Dindori, maybe Bajrang Sonawane, several names that have come up with the best of strike rates that we have seen. Now onto the question, I don't know how that you'll interpret that. Onto the question, that is with respect to the media. We've known about corporate media, the alternative media, at a time when, the corporate media has its own interest and the alternative media, people are not really willing to pay. And we've seen how experiments with paywalls have gone wrong. What is really the solution? Small-time YouTubers, I was at Indore just last week talking to some of the YouTubers from the Hindi belt, and they talked about how overnight their YouTube channels were just shut down because their videos got crores of views within a few days. What really is the sustainable solution?
Yeah. Vinaya, will you grant me that you and I had a discussion on the eve of the counting, and I gave you an extremely accurate prediction for Maharashtra, which was not your prediction? I am sorry. Agreed? Correct, yeah. Okay. Do you know what happened, why some of the poorest candidates could win? As I said, ordinary people went out and showed us how. In Maharashtra, they went out and defeated anyone and everyone whom they saw. By the way, they defeated some very rich defectors. That's also very important. By the way, even in Haryana, people did that. I'm saying that you and I are not doing it, they're doing it. We need to take an inspiration from them. But please, at the end of it, 93% of your parliament is crorpatis. Please don't think that the problem is so easily wished away. That's one thing. The second thing about monopoly. We are the only electoral democracy. You know that even the United States has, naam ke vaste, some rules on cross ownership monopoly. Ownership monopoly. You cannot be the only game in town. You cannot own the only portal, only radio station, only television station, only newspaper in town. You cannot. There are what are called cross ownership laws. There are other ownership laws that were so difficult that Mr. Rupert Murdoch changed his citizenship to American citizenship. He was an Australian. He took British citizenship to get around the anti-monopoly laws. What does it tell me? There are monopoly laws. He then took American citizenship. At one point, when he married a Chinese woman, I thought he's heading for the Chinese market. Yeah. And by the way, he dropped a number of channels in the bouquet, in the star bouquet. He dropped a number of channels that the Chinese government did not like. He was prepared. I think, it might still happen. But instead, there was no scope for a big network. The three great networks were there, ABC, NBC, CBS. And he went and bought Fox Studios. You know which studio? He went, in my words, Murdoch went to the USA and bought a studio that he was pleased to find named after himself, 20th Century Fox. And so then you have Fox today is the biggest network. No CBS, ABC, NBC can compete with it. That extent, but what I'm trying to say is that there were anti-monopoly laws in Australia. And coming to power, they changed the laws. Fox News has managed to have an impact on anti-abortion law, on a number of things. They've been able to influence legal processes. But in 1940s, after World War II, there were huge antitrust acts in the United States. In 1912, after World War I, before World War I, there were huge antitrust acts which broke up the Rockefeller empire. Standard Oil into 7 Oil. The telecom companies, Bell, was broken into 7 baby bells. Okay, it's happened. It's not happened here, but it's happened in the US. It's happened. We too had anti-monopoly laws when we nationalized banks, when we nationalized insurance, etc. And look at what the private insurance is doing to the farmer. 86% of claims rejected. In the first 24 months under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, 18 companies made 1575 crores profit or 21 crores profit per day in the first 24 months. Right? So there is no answer to that but to fight, curb, demolish monopolies. That is the answer to that.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that absolutely brilliant lecture. And my question is, sir, for you. I'm here. My name is Zina Shokatali. Yes. And my question actually, sir, is for you. You mentioned something that has been bothering me and making me feel very despondent. And that is, this devious logic that you mentioned. This devious logic and the power mobilized through the patterns of this devious logic, which is also untruthful, the lies, the untruth and the lies that one sees spun even in Parliament. So, sir, this is for both of you really. How does one deal with this? Is there a law, in a court of law, perjury, when you tell lie, there is a punishment for that. So, is there any kind of a way in which one can, go about this, to overcome this? Is there any way that you can suggest?
There is one kind of rationalism which is being perpetrated by state and religion. Those who are, as he was telling, this high caste, high classes, corporates, zamindars, ruling classes, they are somehow mobilizing devious logic for their interest. Secondly, one has to understand that devious logic also has certain kind of linkages with our ideas of self. For example, there is a caste, gender, and you will find the ideas of caste and gender are mobilized. So mostly the OBC population in India is now somehow aspiring for the Kshatriya status. So when they would be aspiring for the Kshatriya status, they are in certain sense molded into a certain kind of logic where they would be siding with Brahmanism. So the religions, the kind of, we can say, OBC kind of backing to Brahmanism is stronger, basically because it's Kshatriya kind of aspirations. And this is a certain kind of caste aspiration within which it's operated. So one has to understand this whole kind of effect and kind of, we can say, impact of these logics, which is around us. This is not exactly some kind of logics of lies. They are in certain sense imbibed logic as being kind of, we can say being father. I want to, in certain sense, protect my child. And I see any other man as being threatening to my kind of home, my kind of honor, and therefore honor killing and certain kind of, we can say, subjection of women is engineered by me. So this is a certain kind of structures of logic which is operating. So these logics particularly are enslaving us. And this is interesting, this whole kind of caste particularly in material terrains is having a certain kind of dependence. As he was talking about peasantry, peasant is mostly made dependent. For credit he is dependent, for the biyana he is dependent, for to sell his product he is dependent. He is dependent in all his life. And therefore you have to understand he could be exploited. The negotiation power is not given to the peasantry basically about the structures of governance. And if at all we have to emancipate them from their own cultures of, we can say, then you have to understand that we have to take up the fight to the levels of logic and reason. So one has to understand that there are devious logics and we have to build our own logic of emancipation. So when we will be somehow taking the name of Phule, Ambedkar, or can say Karl Marx, or in a kind of other kind of Gandhi, you will find that there are logics of emancipations. And we have to pursue this logic of emancipation. Without this logic of emancipation, we can't, for example, when there was act particularly legislated in 1938, this Trade Dispute Act, and he was talking about this criminalization of strikes. It happened in 1938 when this Trade Dispute Act came. Ambedkar, there were communists, there were socialists, and there were Ambedkar. All were fighting against Trade Dispute Act. But the kind of subtle kind of observation which Ambedkar has made, he said that this particular act will enslave the working class. So there are structures of enslavement. I have seen, particularly contractization in education field. I have seen those who are made on contract basis, that is lecture basis, those are giving contracts. They have to be slaves. And they are enslaved in such a way they could not, we can say, even make strikes. If at all they make strikes, they will be removed. Immediately they will be removed. There is a kind of large scale exploitation, inhuman exploitation going through these kinds of contractization. So the kind of laws, particularly Ambedkar was known for, we can say, labor laws, and you will find that labor laws is now, we can say, just smashed. So one has to understand the structures of, we can say, inequalities which are built and which are entrenched. So we have to build our own logic against it. These reasons, these ruling classes will somehow build these logics, but we have to have our own kind of, we can say, alternative logics, reasons through which we can fight it out.
Can I just add one thing to,
Please,
you spoke about if you do certain kinds of things, there is at least a punishment in the courts.
Yes.
Actually, I differ with that. Whether you get punished in the courts depends a lot on who you are. Yeah? Dalits, Adivasis do not expect are not too expectant of justice in the courts. One of the greatest quotes I ever had in 44 years in journalism came from a Dalit survivor of the Kumher massacre in Rajasthan, in which this February the district court in Bharatpur acquitted the 41 most important people, and 38 people died by the time the case came to court. But Chunilal Jatav, after the massacre, when I was visiting Kumer village, he kept telling me things, and I said, Chunilal ji, ye nahi ho sakta hai. That's violation of the law. 3-4 times I told him this. Then he said, Sainath ji, all the judges of the Supreme Court do not have the power of our local Havaldar. He said, the learned judges listen to the learned lawyers and make learned interpretations. Our Havaldar writes his own laws. The arbitrariness and impunity, he is dealing with Dalits. He can do any damn thing he wants.
Thank you.
Okay, I apologize, but now we just have time for one last question. So, sir, at the back.
Two questions actually. You spoke about many things, sir. I think two important sectors which are strangulated by this gagging are, one is institutes of higher education, and Bagade sir spoke about that little, but the way institute of higher education are strangulated and there is restriction on academic freedom. And second is the non-governmental organizations, the way FCRA and societies registration is affected. And those two sectors have long-term impact over how democracy functions in the country. If you can throw some light on that. My second question is how this gagging is working, because some small journalist in some local newspaper writes something and Home Minister and Prime Minister is taking note of that and taking action against this. I can't imagine that, how this happens. It's such a small hall and in front of 200 people you are saying something. Your YouTube channel will be blocked and your thing will be removed. How is that working? We have heard of IT channel, IT sector, whatever that they are. But there must be something more than that which is used for spying.
Well,
what is
two
that?
things. One is it's working and it's also boomeranging sometimes. I think in the elections you saw something of the boomerang effect. Yeah, but it's working, and I thank you for this question, because I think one of the things, many of the issues, and especially those which Professor Bagade brought on onwards, reminds me that one of the things this country badly needs, I should have said it when I mentioned the 4 intellectuals who were killed. they were all rationalists. And they were all journalists. They all ran magazines, columns. And I think there is a desperate need for promotion of rationalist thinking in this country because of the growth of fundamentalist, absolutely nonsensical things. That mindset, it's deadly in caste, it's deadly in gender, it's deadly in economics. You know, one of the things I forgot to tell you about inequality, when I gave you all those figures, I said, I wanted to tell you that I don't expect the mainstream or so-called mainstream economists to even understand what that mindset is, let alone explain it to the public. But I saw a beautiful post by a very ordinary person on Instagram, which described to me our mentality and our acceptance of devious logic. It said, if a monkey hoarded all the bananas, yeah, and other monkeys starved, scientists would form committees to study that monkey to find out what the hell is wrong with that monkey. But when a human being does it, we put him on the cover of Forbes. So there is this, that the studying of that mindset is something we need, and one of the steps towards it is rationalist thinking, is rationalism. Govind Pansare, rationalist. Narendra Dabholkar, a spearhead of rationalist movement in Maharashtra. Yeah? And his influence went beyond. Gauri Lankesh. Oh, another thing they all had in common, they all worked in their own Indian language. Not in, Gauri was bilingual, but so was Dabholkar to some extent. But primarily they worked in their own languages. And you have to think about this in a period when one language is sought to be imposed, one nation, one language. Yeah? You need to think about it. We need to think about each of those, the desperate need for fighting superstition, ridiculous, distorted frames of logic and thinking that have people acting against their own interest half the time. About your earlier questions, the NGOs and FCRA, I mean, it is actually, while there are NGOs which have done, very little with their FCRA, that is one truth. I call that NGO the non-governmental orgies. But there are also lots of interventions by NGOs and by community-based organizations and people's movements, more than people's movements, which have made life better for a lot of millions and millions of people. Now that part of this gagging is that financial gagging. What they also did to opposition parties, how they killed the campaign, electoral campaign, or ability to campaign in the elections of, ordinary people. So I think that is going to have a very serious impact, in my opinion, on the issue of hunger. It is going to have that kind of an impact. It may not be visible to us across the country, but there are pockets where people are already suffering very badly because the organizations they were dealing with have been fractured, kneecapped. Higher education, I mean, where does one begin on this issue? I mean, it's a much larger issue than the last 10 years. Just look at your whole NEET circus. The thing is that there has been a fundamentalism. See, one thing that the RSS gave far more importance to than any progressive is education. They seized every point and location in education that they could. Yeah? There are textbooks in Madhya Pradesh talking about India defeating China in 1962. There are textbooks in Gujarat which say that Hitler wasn't such a bad fellow, actually he was patriotic and, did good for the German people. I mean, this kind of stuff that you are able to put into a textbook for a child, yeah, and you erase the word Babri Masjid from from the textbooks. Yeah. And say, why bring up hatred? So that again is a battle for the mind. It's a battle for the mind. You need rational thinking. You need thinking where someone is actually saying, for instance, again, what I saw in the 80s at the Mandir movement, that kind of thinking is coming back. And people are, political leaders, openly talking. Those with more children, affiliated to that is the other argument. All Muslims have 4 wives. Actually, these are such stupid arguments that if you stop and engage with it, it takes about 3.5 seconds to demolish it. Our Indian demographic is such, if all Muslims had 4 wives, all Hindus would be bachelors. Okay? Yeah. And since we know they are not, obviously you're making a stupid statement. I think that you have to engage with it. You have to ridicule and destroy that argument. It calls for rational response. It calls for stuff that tears through hypocrisy, religiosity, and fundamentalist obscurantism. Yeah, that's what it calls for.
Okay. Amazing. In the end, everything is a gag, or is it, or should it be, in the times that we are seeing around. Thank you, Bagade sir, for your remarks, and thank you, Sainath ji, for such a wonderful session. Sir is so well equipped not only with his words, but the gadgets. I think that small bag that he's carrying and the lamp that he had put over here on the table. So that is wonderful that he is, carrying all his kitty with himself. And his way of communication and the play of words that he is using, his knowledge as tall as his height and as stylish as his hairstyle. So I am taking this, and yes, it all is organic, yes. So I'm taking the freedom of speech here. And regarding the freedom after speech that sir mentioned earlier, I think I need to read a disclaimer. I cannot mention it here, that all the opinions and views belong strictly to the speakers on this stage. And although YCC stands tall and would love to build this platform, and we are trying our best to build this platform where such rational and whatever was just spoken happens, the discussions happen, maybe it be left, right, up, down, from all the places, because we aim to be the voice of the people. May it be the intellectual, the elite, and most importantly, the ordinary. So today we are not only with you, we're thankful for the audience in spite of the rains you have been here, and also those who are watching us on FB Live. And I think major of our audience are in Marathi also, vernacular. So I would just like to say, I would love to say that word over here, that gagging is muskya bandhne. Because we spoke a lot about farming here. So I just wanted to mention it here. And soon I think we'll come with the translations also of all the Mumbai dialogues that we are having. Right, Dattabhau? Yes, so we are waiting on that. So again, thank you all the audience. This is our 16th session, and I hope with the blessings of all of you, we soon reach our silver jubilee, and this is just happening within a span of 1.5 years. Ram Kumarji, thank you for coming in. There are many faces here that who often bless us with their presence and also their inputs. Doshi sir, thank you for your ideas about making this more reachable to the audience. And yes. So just again, I request all of you to leave. Those who haven't got or those who don't get regular information, please leave your information outside. And Sanjana, please see to it that we have everything in our mailing list. Also, the books are here. So before leaving, please have a look at it. And sorry for what confusion happened with, the going at the center. So maybe we need to make a little bit change in our branding style, not stick to the corporate branding. So we will do that too. Okay. So, and we will end this session with the national anthem. So I would request all of you to please rise. Thank you.